Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, everyone. I hope everything is well at your end, and all of you doing are absolutely great. In the previous lectures, we had been actually doing marketing research, which we actually saw that what is the primary research. We learned about the primary research. We learned about the secondary research. We saw that how can we actually come up with how can we actually do qualitative research as well as the quantitative research. In both the researches, we actually found out that what sort of the data can we actually collect, and how can we actually potentially see an outcome through which we can actually understand the market better. Today, what we are going to actually see in this small session is that how can we actually collect the data. It's more of a instrument. This lecture is basically on the instrument through which you can actually collect the data. The instrument is basically the questionnaires, right? These questionnaires are actually very important because this is the sole source through which the respondent can actually respond to you and tell you that what does exactly that respondent want. So that respondent can be your customer, and if the customer is answering certain number of questions in related to your product or the service, it is very important that you ask the respondent exactly the same sort of a question that you are actually willing to actually ask, right? Because sometimes what happens is that you ask a question, but the response to that question doesn't come out to be exactly what you are expecting because the question is not clear enough, or maybe the question is misleading, and the respondent might consider answering something different than what you are looking for. So this is the reason why the question making a questionnaire is very important. And making a questionnaire, in fact, is something which usually is studied very extensively, right? So initially what we are going to see is that in order to actually ask the questions, either we are going to actually select a qualitative field of the study or the quantitative field of the study. Uh, the questionnaires might be the qualitative, or that's basically the qualitative measures, or maybe there's the quantitative measures are not measured, listed over here, but the quantitative measures are very much there. So the questionnaires might have the qualitative measures as well as the quantitative measures. Some of the questionnaires may actually ask only the qualitative measures, whereas some of them only the quantitative measures, but some of the questionnaires might actually have the qualitative as well as the quantitative perspective. So if you go to the restaurant and see, if you had a dinner or a lunch in a restaurant, you must have seen that at the end of the dinner or the lunch, when they actually present the bill in front of you, they also actually have one little card which actually is a feedback sort of a feedback form, right? So that actually has both quantitative as well as the qualitative questions in it. So that is how they're able to judge the customers, that what do the customers like and what do the customers do not like, so that they can actually enhance or improve this quality of the service within their restaurants, right? So before moving ahead, we would first see that what are the do's and don'ts of a questionnaire. The In order to actually make a questionnaire, we need to ensure this thing, that the questions are free of bias. The questions should not reflect any sort of a thing which should actually have a biasness towards the answer. Um, um, for example, the questions should not actually, if you go to the restaurant, it should not have a question like this, that um, the the food over here was fabulous, right? The questionnaire must may contain the question like, uh, did you like the food over here? But you cannot actually say that the food over here was fabulous or it was excellent, right? So similarly, when you're making the questionnaire, you must list the question, the number of the questions. They should be very simple to understand. They should not, oops, they should not actually contain anything which actually has biasness. So we are at this point right now. Make it should not have the biasness. It should not have. It should be very simple to understand. You should not be using any sort of a jargon, if I say, within the questions. The questionnaire or the question should not have too much of a sophisticated questions, sophisticated words. By sophisticated words, these are those words which actually are not used in our normal language in day-to-day language, right? So in reality, the question should be asked in a way, the wordings of the questions should be in those words that um, those words should be used in our daily lives, right? Not too much of a complicated or the sophisticated words, right? Not ambiguous words that they should be reflecting two different meanings. Similarly, they should be specific to the point. They should be really very straightforward. Then always avoid the negatives, right? You should not be either using too much optimist approach or not too much pessimist approach, right? The questions generally asked are should not actually state like this: the food in this restaurant was not good at all, right? So this not good at all is actually a negative, right? Or you should not be using this. Biased is basically towards the positive side, that this food in this restaurant was fabulous. So both of them should not be used. If you want to ask about the food, you can actually ask that the food in this restaurant, how did you like the food in this restaurant, right? Avoid the words that could be misheard, right? uh, or misread, right? So this is one of the very important parts. There should be clarity within the sentences and the words. Use response bands. We'll discuss these response bands ahead. These response bands are usually used in the quantitative studies, right? So So I'm writing QT in front of it. That is a quantitative. If it is a QL, it's a qualitative within this lecture, right? Use the mutually exclusive categories and allow for other in fixed response questions. Now, by this other, I mean if you're asking about the demographics, for example, might be a possibility to say that what is your educational level, and you have listed undergraduate and graduate, and if you think that there is any other sort of a education level, then you can actually place other in it, right? So so that the person can actually list it down that this is what my education level is. All right. Now, moving onwards, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to cover the quantitative sort of questions and the scales or the response bands which are used in quantitative measures. In the second part, what we are going to do is we are going to see the qualitative after the quantitative bias, right? So both of the questionnaires that we're going to see that how does the data collected can affect the sort of the studies that we had actually discussed before. Because earlier we said that in qualitative study, we can actually understand how and why, whereas the quantitative studies do not reflect how and why, right? So we'll see later on that when the responses come in and what are potentially the responses, they actually give us a different sort of the feedback, both quantitative as well as the qualitative study. So over here, we can actually see that these are the dichotomous type of questions. So by dichotomous, it is a 1 and a 0, which is basically yes or no, right? If you can fairly ask these sort of questions. For example, in arranging the trip, did you contact American Airlines, right? Over here, either you can actually take over here, or you can actually click over here to tell that whether you had actually contacted the particular airline or not, or you must have seen the questions like, did you like the food, or might be a possibility, was your experience good over here, and then you might say yes or no. uh, Similarly, multiple choice questions. Now, in these multiple choice questions, you have to actually give multiple choices to the customers. Now, these sort of the questions are basically used in a different scenario rather than the dichotomous, as compared to the dichotomous, right? These are the questions which you might actually come up with your product. That what are the different, what are the different um, attributes which a customer would probably like in your product or the service, right? And list down all the product the attributes or the features which you might include in your product or the service just below down here, right? So based upon this, the customer might actually take more than one responses and it would be easier for you to understand that what sort of the features does a customer actually want, right? Over here, like it's like with whom are you traveling on this trip? So that is no one, spouse, spouse and children, children only. In this particular case, you can only take one option, but there is an option that where you can actually allow your customers to actually take more than one. Now this sort of an option is only available with the multiple choice, right? It's not necessary. The rest of the scales which we'll be studying will not give you an option to take more than one options, right? So over here in multiple choice, you can actually ask your customers to take more than one options, so that it is clear to you that whether your customer is willing to have more than one features or not, and what features are generally, because when you're going to take the mean of that, this is going to actually tell you later on that which features actually carry more weightage based upon the mean for your customers. Then there is a Likert scale. Likert scale, in this option there you can only take one option amongst these options given below. Now there, it's not necessary uh, that it's always strongly disagree or disagree. The statements may change over here, but most oftenly strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree, or which is it's a neutral, agree or strongly agree. These options are given in a Likert scale, right? Now Likert scale, which the question that you might ask would be, they indicate your level of agreement with the following statements. Small airlines generally give better services than the large ones, right? So you might actually take only one option out of it, right? So similarly, you can ask these sort of questions um, in your market research from your customers, potential customers. Uh, then there is semantic differential. Now this is a very particular scale in which you actually wrote over here Pakistan International Airlines, and this customers would actually listen to this see this Pakistan International Airlines, and this Pakistan International Airlines will be evaluated based upon the three number of factors, which is the large to small, experienced to inexperienced, modern to old fashioned, right? Now, usually what happens is that in cementing differentials, there are numbers given over here like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and so on. And based upon these numbers, the customers are usually expected to encircle one of them, so that you can actually get an idea that if 1 is being the largest one and 7 being the smallest one, what do you think Pakistan International Airline is? Whether it is on the larger side or on the smaller side, right? So if the customer is going to actually encircle this means that the customer thinks that the Pakistan International Airlines is actually on the smaller side. Similarly, if this thing is also going to be on the scale of 7, uh, then if the customer is going to actually say one being is being experienced and seven being inexperienced, and the customer actually encircles this, this means that in the semantic differential scale, on the semantic differential scale, Pakistan International Airlines is basically experienced. uh, Same as the case with the modern and old fashioned. You have to get the numbers over here in the middle, and this customer is going to actually encircle one of the numbers within this particular scale. Then it is importance scale, where you would like to actually understand one of the most important features, which might be important for the customers, right? And again, you just list down different features as a question that maybe this is over here. It's written airline food service is extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not very important, not at all important. But at your end, you might actually say that robot vacuum cleaner, if you are offering a certain feature in that robot vacuum cleaner, then you might actually ask your customer that whether it is extremely important or not at all important, right? So like this, you can actually get a feedback from your customer. Then it is about the rating scale. The rating scale is again from excellent to poor, and this again is on the scale of 5. This actually gives you the basic service, or basic service scale, service rating, that whether the service or the product was good or not. But this kind of a scale is generally used when the customer has already used the product or the service. So in order to investigate what does exactly the customer want, I think one of the scale which can be actually used is this. Then the second scale which can be actually used is, not the Likert scale, but this scale, the multiple choice scale. And then important scale is very important for um, uh, identifying that what does actually the customer want. Then it is intention to buy scale. This is very important. This is where you actually come up with the idea that uh, whether the customer are intending to buy your product or not, right? Like over here, this is how likely are you to purchase tickets on American Airlines if in-flight internet access were available, right? So over here, you have actually certain options over here, which you would actually tell uh, that whether you're going to actually buy it or you're not going to buy it, right? You can actually correlate this thing with your scenario, and you can actually put your product over there and ask the customer whether they are going to buy this feature or buy that product containing this feature or not. Then till this point, it was all quantitative. You can actually quantitatively collect the data and analyze the data to see whether what does your customer want, and what does exactly where does the most of the weight lies in which of the options. By doing this, you can actually either add that particular feature in your product, or take out certain features within your products, because it's actually the customers who actually can tell you that what to be added in the product or what not to be added in the product, based upon their own opinions. Now, because these are all quantitative perspectives, certainly there are many things which are missing in these quantitative perspectives, and that those things are basically how and why. These these qualitative perspectives, where the customer can actually tell you exactly uh, what a customer feels like, and the qualitative perspectives where exactly the customer is going to tell you that what can what does a customer actually want, that can only be revealed in the qualitative studies. For example, if you ask your customer that what is your opinion about of PIA. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to give this one paragraph, or a text box where the customer can actually write their own opinion about a PIA. Now, if the customer is feeling satisfied with the services of PIA, then certainly the customer is going to give a very positive opinion, and how can potentially PIA can improve their services during the flight times. But at the same time, if the service, if the customer is not satisfied, again, the customers can give their own opinion that how can the services can be improved, and whether the services at this point of time are uh, up to the mark or not, right? In your cases, in your case, if you're launching a product, certainly you may ask that what do you think about the robotic vacuum cleaner? But most of the people probably may not know about the robotic cleaner unless the customers have already seen the robotic cleaner, vacuum cleaner, or maybe they have seen the features of the robotic vacuum cleaner. If you think this option is not appropriate enough, I believe this might actually come up with a little bit of a confusion for the customers, because this actually question gives most of the options to the customers who have actually already used the services. Then there is another way you can actually collect the data. This is basically word association. Airline, American, travel. What is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear of the following? That is airline, American, and travel, right? So the customers are going to actually write down the first word which actually comes to your mind. For example, airline, comfortable, American. Maybe it's again more or less the same sort of word, and travel and convenience. These are the kind of things which actually can be asked from the customers. But again, these questions and these word associations can be used by you people as well when you come to the automatic vacuum cleaner, and you list down the different words and write down let the customers write down the first word which actually comes in front of their mind, right? Then it is sentence completion. um, Over here in this, you want the customers to write down and complete the sentence by themselves. So it is asking, more or less asking the same sort of an opinion from the customer. Like it's written over here that when I choose an airline, the most important consideration is my decision is, and the customer is going to actually list down all the things which a customer thinks that which may actually change the decision in buying the airline ticket, right? So when it comes to your product, you can actually ask the customers about your product as well, right? So this is the place where the customer is going to write all the opinions. Then it is a story completion. If within the story completion, the customer has to actually complete the story about what happened next to the customer. So it is I flew the airblue a few days ago. I noticed that the exterior and the interior of the plane had very bright colors. This aroused in me the feelings, thoughts and following thoughts and feelings. Right now, complete this story. Now, the customer is going to actually give the following thoughts and feelings. If the customer is satisfied with the flight and the services of the flight, obviously, or vice versa, the customer is going to actually write down all the opinions over here in the lines below. Right now, this is another way of getting the qualitative feedback from the customers, where the already running services can actually improve the services, or ask the customers that how can they actually improve their services. Now, this is basically one of the last things how you can actually collect the qualitative data, and that is the picture empty blue. Over here, there are two passengers sitting in the airline, and they have food in front of them. Now, one of the customer is asking, well, here's the food. and the second one is about just a blank balloon over here. And what the customer has to do is they have to write down what does this customer think about the food of during the flight, right? So this is to actually improve the flight, the food during the flight, right? Now, if you see most of the part, when the customer actually writes down or explains what actually does a customer want, is actually very different from the quantitative data that we are collecting. So the qualitative data, as compared to the quantitative data, they both actually carry different weightage. You might ask, another difference in qualitative and quantitative data is that for the quantitative data for the quantitative data, you actually require a little bit of a larger amount of the sample as compared to the qualitative data. You might interview a few people, you might give away these kind of questions in qualitative perspective to your potential customers, and they might actually tell you the potential features. But in both the cases, the larger the feedback from the customer, better it is, right? What you have to do is you have to determine the sample size, which probably we will not be studying during this, because we have actually studied during the previous semester that what is sample sizes. I don't need to actually emphasize on the sample size and what different sort of samples are. You can actually go back to that Ranjit Kumar's book and see what different sampling techniques are given in the Ranjit Kumar's book, and or Newman's book, which is actually the research methodologies that we had studied in the previous semester, right? So you can go over there, you can see the sampling techniques and the different qualitative sampling techniques and the quantitative sampling techniques. In both the cases, the sample size really matters, because the larger sample actually gives you a better view. Just in case of the qualitative study, if you think, just in the case of the qualitative study, it's not valid for the quantitative study. Your qualitative study is the sample size may be smaller, but depends if the opinions of the customers are actually getting to a point where you get a saturation, right? By saturation, it means that the customers keep on repeating, or the respondents keep on repeating the same thing again and again over the responses, right? And you are not getting anything new out of the responses. In qualitative study, we call this thing as a theoretical saturation, right? We call it a theoretical saturation because no new thing comes up within the discussion, during the discussion or the interview or the feedback from the customers, right? So if you're not getting anything new, you might be actually getting theoretical saturation. But again, if looking at the questions in qualitative and the quantitative, if you see over here, these questions can actually explain the answers very elaboratively, whereas in these questions, the elaboration of the reasoning by the respondents is not there, right? So these are the basic difference between the quantitative and the qualitative, and these are the different scales and the instruments through which you can actually collect the data, both quantitative and qualitative. Right now, what we are going to do is that we are going to actually have another assignment where you can actually develop a questionnaire like this, maybe qualitative or quantitative, depends upon you, and depends upon your potential targeted market. And what you can do is you can actually collect the data from different respondents of yours, and you can do your own analysis and see if the customers, what do the customers actually say about the products that you are developing at this point of time, right? So that is it in this lecture, and that is all in the marketing research. Hope to meet you next time in the next week. If you have any queries, if you have questions, please WhatsApp me, or maybe comment under the video, or maybe what you can do is you can actually list down all the questions and ask me in the live session on Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. right? Till next time, Allah Hafiz and bye-bye.